Melissa Granger was a beloved kindergarten teacher. Ethan Cole was her gym trainer. James Whitaker was a married father at her school. Luca Ramirez was a traveling salesman. All four were connected by one secret, and only one would make it out. Alive, Melissa Granger was the type of person who made everyone around her feel at ease. At 32, she had worked as a kindergarten teacher for nearly a decade, known for her patience, warmth, and the way she always knelt to a child's level. When speaking, her classroom was filled with bright posters, colorful handprints, and the smell of crayons and storybooks. Parents adored her, and children often talked about her at home like she was a favorite aunt. Melissa was polite to everyone, always brought homemade cookies to staff meetings, and never raised her voice. To those who saw her every day, she seemed like the definition of goodness. No one had any reason to look deeper. She lived in a quiet cul-de-sac with her husband, Daniel Granger, a firefighter who had been with the local station for 15 years. He was a strong, dependable man who rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. Their neighbors described them as the perfect couple. They shared a neat, single-story home with a white picket fence, blooming flower beds, and a loyal golden retriever named Max. On weekends, they were seen walking the dog together, attending community barbecues, or working in the garden side by side. They were the kind of couple others envied, not flashy, but solid, secure. Inside their home, the walls were decorated with framed wedding photos and vacation snapshots. There was no sign of conflict, no raised voices behind the closed doors, no visible cracks. But like many seemingly perfect things, the Grangers' life had a hidden underside. Melissa had grown restless. Her marriage, though stable and kind, lacked passion. Daniel worked long shifts, and when he was home, he was tired, quiet, and preoccupied with the stresses of his job. They had tried for years to have children, without success. After a series of failed fertility treatments, Melissa had stopped talking about it. Her smile stayed on her face, but it no longer reached her eyes. One morning, as Daniel showered before his shift, Melissa stood at the kitchen counter scrolling through her phone. A message preview flashed across the screen. It was short, just a heart emoji and a time. But it wasn't from Daniel. Without hesitation, she deleted it. She had become good at that. Her second phone, hidden in a makeup bag inside her closet, stayed silent unless she opened it. It was prepaid, untraceable, and completely separate from the rest of her life. That phone held the other part of her world, the one no one saw. It had started innocently, with a conversation at the gym. A man smiled at her, complimented her form. He was charming, young, and different from Daniel in every way. She told herself it was harmless, just someone appreciating her. But one compliment became regular chats, then late-night messages, then meetings. Once the line was crossed, it became easier to cross again. By the end of the year, Melissa was involved with 3 different men. Each of them thought they were special. Each believed they had something real with her. And Melissa, surprisingly, didn't feel guilty. She told herself they filled in the missing pieces of her life: attention, excitement, desire. She kept the roles separate, careful not to let one life touch the other. It was a balancing act she had mastered. Or so she thought. The first crack appeared when Daniel noticed she was coming home later than usual. He asked casually, not out of suspicion, but concern. Melissa explained it away with a parent meeting and smiled. The lie slipped out so easily. Too easily. But it planted a seed. And Daniel, not one to pry, began watching her more closely without letting her know. What he'd eventually discover would not only change their marriage, it would lead to the kind of story no one in their town could ever have imagined. That Melissa's double life unfolded with a rhythm so precise it was almost mechanical. Every weekday morning, she packed her lunch, kissed Daniel goodbye, and walked into her classroom with the same cheerful calmness that parents had come to expect. She led story time, organized snack breaks, and helped 5-year-olds tie their shoes with steady, gentle hands. But the moment she stepped outside of school, she transformed into someone entirely different, calculating, impulsive, and dangerously confident. Her first affair had started with Ethan Cole. He was a personal trainer at the gym she visited 3 times a week. In his mid-30s, he was muscular, outgoing, and full of compliments. He noticed her when no one else did. When he flirted, she flirted back. What began as harmless banter turned into coffee dates, then hotel meetups during school lunch breaks. Melissa told Ethan her marriage was cold, that Daniel barely looked at her anymore. Ethan, who had never settled down, believed he was doing her a favor, bringing excitement back into her life. Then came James Whitaker, a parent of one of her students. He was older than Ethan, soft-spoken, and always dressed in neatly ironed, button-down shirts. James volunteered in the classroom twice a month and always stayed a few minutes late during pickup. His daughter adored Melissa, and James, a married man with 2 children, found himself looking forward to every interaction. One day, he left a coffee on her desk with a handwritten note. Melissa knew exactly where it would lead. Within weeks, they were meeting in his car during lunch breaks, always parked in distant lots far from the school. The third man, Luca Ramirez, entered her life by chance. He sold educational supplies and visited schools across the state. He met Melissa during a demonstration for new classroom materials. She laughed at his jokes and complimented his tie. He offered her free samples, and she offered him her number. Their meetings were rare but intense. He traveled often, which made things easier. Melissa told him she was single. No strings, no expectations. Each relationship served a purpose. Ethan made her feel young and desired. James gave her a sense of comfort and control. Luca brought unpredictability and adventure. They never overlapped in person, and Melissa worked hard to keep it that way. She had different names saved for each man in her contact list, coded and unsuspicious. Her second phone was always kept away from Daniel's sight. She deleted texts, cleared call logs, and memorized key details to avoid slipping up. No one in her circle suspected a thing. But the strain of managing so many lies started to show in subtle ways. Melissa began missing appointments. She was late to a staff meeting, something completely out of character. She forgot a student's birthday, which upset a parent. She brushed it off with excuses about stress, but it was more than that. She was distracted, always checking her phone, always calculating the next step. She had started to enjoy the rush of secrecy, the feeling of having complete control over multiple lives. It made her feel powerful. What Melissa didn't realize was that the men were starting to notice small inconsistencies too. Ethan, always impulsive, began asking questions. James, usually reserved, noticed she sometimes mentioned places they'd never been together. Luca, ever observant, caught a glimpse of a message preview on her phone while they were at a cafe. The name wasn't his. None of them said anything right away, unsure if they were being paranoid or jealous. But the seeds of suspicion were planted. As Melissa continued juggling her lives, her luck was slowly running out. The carefully constructed walls between her worlds had hairline cracks forming, cracks that would soon split wide open. And when they did, the fallout would be far more than she ever anticipated. The unraveling began with a simple coincidence. One evening, Ethan drove past a quiet bookstore downtown on his way home from the gym. As he stopped at a red light, he glanced to his left and froze. Inside the store's dimly lit window sat Melissa, leaning across a table, smiling in a way he recognized all too well. But the man sitting opposite her wasn't him. Ethan didn't move. He watched as the man, older, wearing a pressed blue shirt, reached across the table and gently touched Melissa's hand. She didn't pull away. In fact, she laughed and tilted her head just the way she did when flirting. The light turned green, but Ethan stayed, staring, until the car behind him honked. Something shifted inside him. He didn't confront Melissa that night. Instead, He went home and sat in silence. At first, he tried to convince himself it was innocent. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe she was saying goodbye. But he couldn't shake the feeling. So the next day, he followed her. He parked down the street from her school and waited until her shift ended. She got in her car and drove straight to a park on the other side of town. Ethan trailed her from a distance, keeping just far enough not to be seen. When she pulled into the lot, he watched as the same man from the bookstore approached her vehicle. She got out. They hugged. They kissed and IT confirmed everything. Ethan felt sick. He had fallen for her, genuinely believed they had something meaningful. But now it was clear he wasn't the only one. In the days that followed, something in him darkened. The gym became a place of rage instead of relief. He began drinking more. His messages to Melissa turned colder, shorter, but she didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. Either way, he was no longer interested in talking. He wanted her to feel what he felt. Betrayed. Humiliated. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a note, typed and unsigned, left in Melissa's mailbox. "You're not who you pretend to be. People are watching." She crumpled it and laughed nervously, thinking it was from an angry parent. But then her car tires were slashed while parked outside the gym. A voicemail arrived from an unknown number with heavy breathing and silence. She began to worry. She told Daniel someone must have a problem with her at work. Maybe a parent with a grudge. He took it seriously and installed small security cameras around their home. He promised to protect her, never suspecting that the threat wasn't coming from a stranger. Meanwhile, James had his own suspicions. He had noticed Melissa was more distracted lately, always glancing at her phone, sometimes mixing up things they'd done together. She once thanked him for a gift he'd never given. Another time she referred to a dinner that never happened. James, being cautious by nature, started digging quietly. One evening, he created a fake profile on a dating app and found her within minutes. The photo was older, but unmistakably her. He messaged her anonymously, and when she replied, his heart sank. Separately, Luca also began piecing things together. On his last visit, he spotted a message notification pop up on her phone. The name read Mrs. Bennett, but the content of the preview didn't sound like anything a colleague would send. His instincts, honed from years of travel and short-term flings, told him something was off. He began watching her more closely, noting inconsistencies in her stories. Within weeks, all three men knew. Not the full details, but enough to realize they weren't alone. Ethan, unable to keep the anger inside, searched online and found James through school connections. An anonymous message was sent. Then another. Eventually, all three men were aware of each other. They had been strangers before. Now, they were bound by one woman's web of lies. What had started as secret affection turned into shared fury. And soon, they would begin talking to each other. Not just about Melissa, but about what to do next. IT began with a single meeting in a dimly lit bar just outside town. James arrived first, sitting in a back booth with a glass of whiskey he barely touched. Ethan came in next, more tense than angry, his jaw tight and shoulders hunched. Luca was last, dressed sharp as always, but with an edge in his expression that hadn't been there before. The silence between them was thick at first. They were strangers, tied together by the same deception, unsure of who to trust. But as they began to talk, the details poured out. Dates, lies, gifts, promises. All of them had been told nearly identical stories. Melissa had painted herself as lonely, unloved, neglected. She had convinced each man that she needed them, and only them. The discovery stung in different ways. Ethan had been emotionally invested. James had risked his family. Luca, though the most emotionally detached, still hated being made a fool. Together, they mapped out her lies, trying to understand how deeply they had been played. What had been a private humiliation became a shared obsession. They watched her, tracked her movements, exchanged information. At first, it seemed like a way to regain control. But their conversations grew darker. Ethan pushed the hardest. He believed Melissa deserved to be punished, to be exposed. He suggested confronting her publicly, forcing her to confess. James hesitated. His daughter was still in Melissa's class, and his wife knew nothing of the affair. Lucas suggested blackmail. Nothing violent, just enough pressure to make her break. But Ethan was already too far gone for subtlety. He had lost sleep, lost focus, and lost his sense of proportion. Every day that passed felt like an insult. He wanted her to feel afraid. Melissa noticed small changes. She thought she saw someone following her car one day. Her classroom door, usually left untouched after hours, was ajar when she arrived one morning. The anonymous messages started again, this time more aggressive. "We know what you did," one said. Another simply read, "Tick-tock." Still, she said nothing to Daniel beyond vague complaints about school stress. She feared admitting the truth would destroy everything. And in some strange way, she still believed she could fix it all if she just stayed careful. Daniel, meanwhile, had been watching. The security footage showed Melissa stepping outside late at night, talking on the phone in hushed tones. One night, she didn't come home until after midnight. When Daniel confronted her, she told him she was helping a colleague with a family emergency. He wanted to believe her, but the pieces weren't adding up. Quietly, he checked her phone one afternoon while she showered. What he found shattered him. Messages, pictures, calls. Not just one man. Multiple. All recent that he didn't tell Melissa what he knew. Instead, he printed the evidence and locked it in a drawer. He began sleeping on the couch. Melissa noticed, but didn't press the issue. She was too consumed with managing her lies. And then, just as suddenly as it began, she vanished. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Melissa signed out of school early, claiming she had a dentist appointment. Her car was found the next morning in a parking lot near a wooded trail. The doors were locked. Her purse was inside, along with her phone, now dead. At first, it looked like she had just wandered off. But as hours passed and no sign of her turned up, worry turned into panic. The police launched a search. Flyers went up. Volunteers combed the woods. News reports painted her as a beloved teacher who had mysteriously disappeared. None of the three men contacted police. None came forward. Daniel cooperated with investigators, but didn't mention the affairs. He waited, silent, hoping for answers, afraid of what those answers might be. All anyone could do was wait, unaware that the truth was already buried, literally and figuratively, not far from where her car had been found. The search for Melissa stretched into its second week, and hope was beginning to fade. The community that once adored her was now anxious, confused, and quietly suspicious. Candlelight vigils were held near the school playground where her students left paper hearts and crayon drawings. News vans parked outside her home. Reporters called her disappearance heartbreaking and strange. But behind the public sympathy, whispers had begun. A woman vanishing without a trace. No struggle, no note. Didn't sit right with anyone. Then, 15 days after she was last seen, a hunter walking through the forest stumbled upon something unusual near the base of a hill. A patch of freshly disturbed soil. At first, he assumed it was from an animal. But as he got closer, something caught his eye. Fabric, pale and torn, barely peeking out from the dirt. He backed away immediately and called the police. The site was quickly sealed off. Crime scene investigators uncovered the shallow grave and confirmed what many had feared. The body inside was Melissa's. She was still wearing the floral dress she had been last seen in. Her hands were bruised, her skull fractured from what appeared to be blunt force trauma. There were signs of a struggle. Her nails were broken. Dirt was embedded in her skin. She had fought. The investigation shifted overnight. A missing person case became a homicide. Detectives retraced every moment of Melissa's last day. The school confirmed she had signed out early. Her phone records led nowhere. Her calls were mostly to known contacts, and her second phone was missing entirely. Then, one key piece of evidence surfaced. Under her fingernails was skin tissue, DNA from another person. It was a match to Ethan Cole. Police arrested him 2 days later at his apartment. He didn't run. He didn't resist. When questioned, he cracked within hours. His confession was bitter and unsteady. He said he hadn't planned to kill her, just scare her. He wanted her to know she couldn't treat people like they didn't matter. But things escalated. They argued in the woods. He claimed she laughed at him, denied everything, called him nothing. He snapped. One strike turned into several. When it was over, he panicked and buried her with his bare hands. But what the investigators uncovered next made things worse. Ethan hadn't acted alone, not entirely. Phone records, emails, and digital footprints tied James and Luca to the days leading up to Melissa's death. There were meetups, shared messages, and vague language that hinted at planning. James had lied to police during early questioning. Luca had deleted entire chains of texts. Both were brought in and interrogated separately. James admitted to meeting with Ethan and Luca, but insisted he had no idea Ethan would hurt her. Luca said they had talked about confronting her, nothing more. Still, their involvement couldn't be denied. They had tracked her movements, shared personal information, and failed to alert anyone when she disappeared. Both were arrested and later charged as accomplices. The trial became a national spectacle. 3 men, all seduced and betrayed, brought together by resentment and wounded pride. Ethan was sentenced to life in prison without parole. James and Luca each received lesser sentences for their roles in the events leading up to Melissa's death. Daniel, her husband, never spoke publicly. Again, he moved out of town quietly, leaving behind the home they once shared and the memories he could no longer bear. Melissa's story became a cautionary tale about secrecy, obsession, and the dark consequences of living too many lives at once. Her students, too young to understand the details, were told she had gone to a better place. But in the quiet corners of the community, people still wonder what really happened in those woods, and whether the whole truth was ever truly revealed.